Sing a song, yeah. So these kind of somewhat chant-like sounds. We've already released the CD where the voice, the vocals is done by the prosthetic head, but we, with the help of Cameron Jones in Melbourne, a scientist in Melbourne, we've done some very interesting work with remixing the original CD, and by printing fractals on the surface of the CD, and depending on whether the fractal is red, green or blue, depending on the position or size of that fractal, and depending on the actual shape of the fractal itself, what will result is a remix of the tracks that are different every time you play the CD, and every time different whether it's on an audio CD player, a Mac operating system or a PC operating system. So it's a really interesting, in other words, it messes up the laser reader, and what happens is that generates artifacts, sounds that were never there originally. Sometimes it slows the voice, sometimes it produces reverb that wasn't in the original. So it's very, very interesting. And the other way that we're going to remix the tracks is by growing penicillium on the surface of the CD. A penicillium entity is about 2 microns in diameter, and that approximates the pock marks on the surface of the CD. So by growing penicillium on the surface of the CD, you'll get the laser reader again to read it in erratic and different ways. We can also do this with anthrax, but this would be difficult to distribute the CD. So we're sticking to the penicillium. This generated another project called the Partial Head project. And this, instead of just simply a digital skin, what we did here was we scanned the artist's face. We scanned a hominid skull. Then we did a kind of digital transplant of this face over a hominid skull. The resulting image is a face that is kind of proto-hominid but pre-human in appearance. Actually, not much different than what I look now. But there's a more pronounced jaw, a more receding brow, right? And then what we did using that digital transplant was we 3D printed a scaffold, and we grew a living skin over the surface of that scaffold. So this kind of proto-hominid, pre-human face had a layer of living skin, and this is the sort of a microscopic vision of the cells growing. And what I'd like to leave you with to complete this presentation is this idea of organ printing, which is hybridizing rapid prototyping techniques with tissue culture and biotechnology work. So it's now possible to print using a jet-based printer, not only with, globules of ink, but actually with globules of living cells. And the sort of an indication of the process, and one of the leading researchers, Vladimir Mironov, I met several years ago at a prototyping conference, and what was amazing was that rapid prototyping had almost completely been overtaken by biotechnology and biomedical uses in terms of printing prosthetic implants, and also the possibility, for example, of printing anything from an ear, a nose, or possibly even in the future, if we provide a 3D anatomical model for the computer, then, and this is the corporate Hewlett-Packard view of a future 3D printer, which has duly printed a heart in all the complexity of its structure. Of course, there would be a huge leap to animate this heart. You would have to immerse it in a vat of nutrients. You would have to heat it to 37 degrees centigrade. You would have to electrically stimulate it to get the muscle kicking in and pulsing. So to animate the heart or the printed organ would be something that's not going to happen in 50 to 100 years. It's probably going to happen perhaps in a couple of 100 years. But in terms of printing a body organ, they're now doing research already to do that. And so we're sort of living in a kind of an age now of what we would call organs without bodies. Organs are being harvested from human bodies and from cadavers to be used for transplants. But in theory now, organs can also be printed. So organs will not need bodies to be, in a sense, manufactured. So it's sort of an interesting issue now. Not only will there be organs without bodies, but these organs will be kind of labelled as partially living entities. Not quite alive until you animate them in some further way. So I'd like to complete this presentation, which was really about projects that he explored and tentatively explored intimate, involuntary and extended interfaces with technology, and also explored what it means to implant technology inside the body, and with different kinds of body constructs, even to a kind of construct of a liquid body hosted by a machine. So to end up, are there any questions? And I think Eva will help with a microphone. Are there any questions about these projects, the ideas behind them? You can ask the question to my head or myself. Oh, and by the way, the idea of this talking head is that after 2 or 3 more years of programming, the artist will not be able to take full responsibility for what his head says. And you have to imagine this as an art installation. This head is projected 5 meters in height, and it's in a completely dark space. When you enter the room, the head has its eyes closed. When you walk over to the keyboard, the sensor system detects you. The head turns, opens its eyes, and asks you the first question. We are now developing a vision system for the head, so the head will be able to have visual information about the user. So, for example, halfway through your conversation with the head might say, "Oh, by the way, I really like your red sweater." Or, "Why are you so nervous?" Or, you know, in principle, of course, it could do facial recognition as well. But it's a project that's a work in progress again, and with the vision system, it will be a much more seductive and interactive agent. It's not seen as an illustration of an intelligent agent, but rather coupled to a human user, there's the possibility that there's an interesting verbal and visual exchange. So it's a conversational system, not an intelligent agent.